The first time I heard Andrew's name, it was in passing. A friend mentioned him, chuckling over his smooth-talking ways and ability to charm the pants off anyone. At the time, I laughed it off. Men like Andrew sounded like characters from a bad soap opera, the sort you wouldn't expect to encounter in real life. Besides, my wife, Emily, would never fall for a guy like that. She was grounded, smart, loyal, or so I thought. But little by little, things started changing. Emily was suddenly obsessed with the gym, spending hours working on her physique as if her life depended on it. Our conversations began revolving around her job, her workouts, or worse, just silence. I didn't want to think anything of it. After all, marriage takes work, and I trusted her. One night, though, a friend's offhand comment shattered any illusion I'd been clinging to. Over drinks, he mentioned a new scandal spreading through town. Someone's wife had left him for that guy, Andrew Stone. My blood ran cold. Andrew wasn't just some guy. He was infamous in our social circle. This wasn't the first, second, or even third time I'd heard about him. He had, apparently, destroyed 13 marriages, leaving chaos in his wake as though it was just another game to him. And it wasn't long before I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Emily's late nights, the missed calls, her guarded, almost paranoid attachment to her phone. Suddenly, it all added up to one terrifying possibility. Andrew had gotten to her, too. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut, leaving me reeling in disbelief. How could Emily, the woman I'd trusted implicitly, fall prey to a man like Andrew Stone? I wanted to deny it, to believe that our years together and our shared life would make her immune to his manipulations. But the signs were everywhere now, glaring and impossible to ignore. Determined to find the truth, I decided to dig deeper. I needed solid evidence before I could confront her. So, I started by following her one evening after she left for another work meeting. The plan was simple. I'd tail her from a safe distance, nothing too obvious. I couldn't believe I was actually doing this, but I was left with no choice. As her car weaved through the city streets, I found myself praying she was just meeting a colleague or maybe catching up with an old friend. I tried to hold on to that sliver of hope, but my gut told me otherwise. She eventually pulled into the parking lot of a high-end hotel, a place that had no business being part of her work routine. I parked a few rows back, watching as she glanced around before stepping out. She wore a dress I hadn't seen before, one that hugged her body in a way that made my heart twist painfully. This was a different Emily, one who was putting on a show, dressing up for someone else. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I watched her walk confidently through the hotel's glass doors, like she belonged there. Everything inside me screamed to run up and confront her, to demand answers right then and there. But I forced myself to wait. Patience, I reminded myself. Just a little longer, and I'd have all the evidence I needed. I waited outside the hotel, my heart pounding with a sickening mix of anger and anxiety. Every minute felt like an eternity as I watched the front entrance, hoping, absurdly, that she'd emerge quickly, maybe alone, and this could all be some innocent misunderstanding. But the minutes stretched on, and she didn't reappear. A few hours later, just as I was beginning to think I'd been left out in the cold with nothing to show for it, I saw him, Andrew. He strolled out of the hotel, that smug grin on his face like he'd just won some kind of twisted game. He was all too familiar, even though we'd never met face to face. I'd seen him at social events, and we shared enough mutual friends that his reputation had preceded him. Tall, confident, with that swagger that practically screamed trouble. Seeing him in the flesh, my suspicions solidified. He was exactly the type of guy I'd warned Emily about years ago. The kind that doesn't care whose life he ruins so long as he gets what he wants. I sat there, fists clenched, my mind racing. Andrew turned and checked his phone, completely unaware of my watchful gaze. A few minutes later, Emily stepped out. She looked around, and the way her eyes lit up when she saw him hit me like a punch to the stomach. She practically floated over to him, a wide smile on her face, like she was greeting her hero. They embraced, and then he kissed her, not in a discreet or friendly way, but like a man who knew she was his. That was it. Every last shred of doubt, every lingering hope that this was all in my head, vanished. The sight of that kiss burned into my mind, and something inside me snapped. My body tensed with a raw, seething anger, and for a moment, I could barely keep myself from storming over there, from making a scene right on the hotel steps. But I forced myself to stay seated, to breathe, and to think. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. This was about taking back control, about making sure that Andrew Stone never had the chance to play me like he had so many others. I pulled out my phone and took several photos, capturing every sordid detail. It felt wrong, surreal, but I needed proof. Undeniable evidence that couldn't be brushed away or spun into some convenient lie. Each photo was a dagger, yet I took them, feeling the weight of betrayal sharpen with each shot. After they drove off separately, I followed her home. I stayed out of sight, watching as she entered our house as though nothing had happened. She glanced in the mirror by the door, smoothing her hair, adjusting her dress, a final touch to hide the evening's sins. Then, she slipped into bed beside me, her breathing steady as if she just returned from a regular night at work. For hours, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Anger burned beneath my skin, but there was something deeper there, too. A simmering need for justice, for revenge. I wouldn't let her, or Andrew, get away with this. I was going to turn their game on its head. As the first light of morning broke through the window, a plan started to form in my mind. It would take patience, precision, and timing. But I knew exactly how I was going to make them regret ever crossing me. The next day, I went about my morning as usual. I brewed coffee, made breakfast, and pretended like nothing had changed. Emily joined me in the kitchen, offering a casual good morning, and kissed me on the cheek. The gall of it was enough to make me choke, but I kept my face neutral, even managed a small smile, careful not to give away the rage that burned beneath the surface. I spent the day planning my next steps. First, I needed to know everything: when they met, where, and for how long this had been going on. If I was going to dismantle their secret world, I had to know every detail they thought they'd hidden from me. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. I reached out to a discreet firm that a friend had used in a similar situation. Within an hour, I was meeting with a man named Harris in a small, dimly lit office. He was older, gray-haired, with a calm, calculating look that told me he'd seen it all. As I laid out the situation, showing him the photos I'd taken, his expression didn't change. He simply nodded, asked a few clarifying questions, and took notes. Finally, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Do you want this to be discreet, or do you plan on confrontation?" he asked carefully. "Oh, I'm planning on a confrontation," I replied, "but not until I have everything I need to bury them both." He nodded, his face unreadable. "Understood. I'll be in touch soon with updates. We'll get you what you need." Walking out of that office, I felt a strange sense of relief, a grim satisfaction that this was just the beginning. Emily and Andrew thought they were getting away with their little secret, but they had no idea that the walls were closing in around them. The following week felt like an eternity. Harris worked quickly, sending me regular updates, each one more damning than the last. Text messages, photos of their meetings, hotel receipts. It all painted a vivid picture of a betrayal that was deeper and longer than I dared to imagine. They'd been seeing each other for almost 6 months, weaving their web of deceit right under my nose. Every night, Emily came home to me, acting as if nothing was wrong, playing the role of a loving wife while sneaking glances at her phone, her thumb idly stroking the side of the screen, no doubt reading messages from him. It was sickening, but I kept up my act, responding with kind words, even little romantic gestures, which she returned with a smile that now seemed hollow. She had no idea what was coming. Harris sent me everything I needed. Not only were they meeting in hotels, but Andrew had taken her on trips, romantic getaways under the pretense of work conferences. The depth of their affair wasn't just a fling. It was an elaborate lie, one they'd crafted carefully to hurt and humiliate me. As I flipped through the evidence on my laptop one last time, a new idea struck me. If Emily and Andrew thought they were so good at keeping secrets, I would give them one of my own. It was time to plan my move. I'd confront them, but not in the privacy of our home. No, this confrontation would be public, unforgettable, and devastating. I started by arranging a party, a large, lavish anniversary celebration. Emily was delighted when I mentioned it, her eyes lighting up in excitement. She thought it was just another sign that she had me fooled, that she could carry on her double life without consequences. Little did she know, this party would be the stage where I'd reveal everything. The party was set for 2 weeks later. I poured everything into the preparations, arranging for a stunning venue, an upscale restaurant with panoramic views of the city. I spared no expense, hiring a caterer, a live band, and a photographer to capture our special day. Emily was thrilled, telling her friends and family about the anniversary event with such excitement that it almost made me second-guess my plan. Almost. I wanted to be sure that everyone who mattered would be there. Our close friends, family, even some of Emily's colleagues. And of course, I made sure Andrew Stone would be invited as well. A quick call from my assistant to his office was enough to confirm his RSVP. There was no way he'd miss an opportunity to flaunt his charm at a big, fancy gathering. As the date drew nearer, Emily seemed happier, more affectionate than she'd been in months. She'd assumed my efforts were a sign of my undying love for her, my commitment to our marriage. But for me, each detail I planned was like setting up pieces on a chessboard, carefully arranging every move for the perfect checkmate. On the night of the party, I watched her get ready, admiring herself in the mirror. She wore a sleek, black dress, her hair swept up elegantly, a picture of grace and beauty. She was the woman I had loved for years, the mother of my children, and yet she had become a stranger who was about to face the consequences of her choices. When we arrived, the room was buzzing with excitement, laughter echoing off the walls, and friends congratulating us on our anniversary. Emily soaked in the attention, basking in the glow of admiration from our guests. As I scanned the room, my eyes fell on Andrew. He was in the corner, dressed sharply, sipping his drink, casting quick, smug glances at Emily from across the room. He had no idea what was about to hit him. As the evening progressed, I waited for the right moment, letting the anticipation build. Emily and Andrew exchanged discreet glances, sneaking smiles, likely thinking they were getting away with their charade right under my nose. But then, as the clock struck 9, I took the microphone, calling everyone's attention for a little speech. The room fell silent as I raised my glass, beginning the toast that would bring the night's true purpose to life. I stood there, holding the microphone, letting the silence settle as everyone turned to face me. Emily beamed at me from across the room, unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. I raised my glass, pretending to feel the warmth of the occasion, and began. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this wonderful milestone. I started, glancing around at our friends and family. It's hard to believe it's been so many years together. Emily and I have built a life full of memories, shared dreams, and, as I recently discovered, a few unexpected surprises. There was a murmur of laughter, everyone assuming it was a light-hearted remark. Emily smiled, though a flicker of unease crossed her face. I continued, my voice steady but laced with a growing edge. Marriage, as we all know, is built on trust, honesty, and love. We celebrate each year, cherishing what we've built, and I truly believe that our relationship embodied those principles. But tonight, I've realized that we're celebrating something a little different. A few puzzled faces in the crowd exchanged glances, and I could see Emily shifting uncomfortably. I met her eyes and gave a small, humorless smile. You see, I continued, setting my glass down, this celebration isn't just for our anniversary. It's also a celebration of truth, a truth I've recently uncovered. I held up the manila envelope I'd stashed under the podium. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a collection of messages, hotel receipts, and photographs of my wife and her friend, Andrew Stone. A shocked gasp rippled through the crowd as I pulled out a few of the photos and held them up for everyone to see. Emily's face turned pale, her hands flying to her mouth. Across the room, Andrew froze, his smug expression morphing into sheer panic. Emily, I said, my voice dripping with icy calm, did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think that you and Andrew, of all people, could keep this secret? The room fell into an eerie silence, eyes darting between Emily and Andrew. Emily stammered, her face twisted with shock and horror. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. And as I looked around at the stunned faces of our guests, I felt a sense of justice, cold and unrelenting, sweeping through me. Emily stumbled forward, her eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She tried to compose herself, but the crowd's silent judgment weighed on her like a ton of bricks. Andrew, too, looked as though he'd been sucker-punched. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if seeking an escape route. But I wasn't done. "Andrew," I said, turning my gaze toward him, "I want to thank you for coming. It takes a special kind of person to show up to a man's anniversary party after secretly seeing his wife for 6 months." Andrew tried to stammer out a response, but his voice was lost under the murmurs and disgusted glances from our friends and family. The very people who had celebrated with us in this room, who had been a part of our lives, were now whispering, shaking their heads in disbelief. Andrew's once charming demeanor had faded, replaced by a look of panic. I turned back to Emily, who still stood there, frozen, tears beginning to streak down her cheeks. She looked small, vulnerable, but any sympathy I might have had for her was long gone. "How long were you planning on keeping this up, Emily?" I asked, my voice low but audible to everyone in the room. "How long were you going to pretend that everything was fine, that we were happy?" She took a shaky step forward, her hand reaching out to me. "Jack, I can explain." "Explain?" I laughed bitterly. "Please go ahead. I'd love to hear the explanation for how my wife decided that our life, our family, wasn't enough. Explain why you thought sneaking around with him was better than the years we've spent together." Her hand dropped, her face crumbling as she realized there was no way out. The crowd watched, some looking away in discomfort, others transfixed by the rawness of the moment. She had no words left, and frankly, I didn't need to hear any more. "Actually, you know what? Never mind," I said, waving her off. "Because I'm done. I wanted you to see, to feel even a fraction of the humiliation and betrayal I've been feeling since I found out. But now, it's over." I pulled a second envelope from my jacket pocket and held it up for everyone to see. Inside this envelope, Emily, are the divorce papers. I've signed them. You can consider this our official goodbye. The finality of my words echoed through the room, and for the first time that night, Emily seemed to grasp the weight of what was happening. Her face twisted with regret, her voice a barely audible plea. "Jack, please." But I had no sympathy left. I set the microphone down and walked away, leaving her and Andrew to face the judgment of everyone who now knew the truth. As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders, a strange lightness overtaking the rage and hurt that had consumed me for weeks. Behind me, I could hear the commotion, people murmuring, voices raised in shock and disbelief, Emily's faint cries calling after me. But I didn't turn around. Not this time. I kept walking, each step taking me further from the lies, the betrayal, and the life I thought I'd had. I drove home in silence, replaying the scene in my head. There was something deeply satisfying about finally taking control, about exposing Emily and Andrew for who they truly were. They had toyed with my trust, mocked my loyalty, and now, they'd been left bare, humiliated in front of the very people they thought they could deceive. When I reached the house, I felt a pang of bitterness as I looked at the place we'd built together. This home, once filled with memories of happiness and love, was now just a hollow shell, tainted by lies. But tonight had marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would rebuild, free from the web of deceit they'd woven around me. Inside, I poured myself a drink, letting the alcohol burn away the last remnants of anger. I settled into my chair and opened my laptop, logging into my email. Among the flood of messages from friends and family, expressing their disbelief and sympathy, was a message from Harris, the investigator. Attached were copies of the divorce papers I'd sent Emily, finalized with all the evidence of her affair for the legal process. The solid, undeniable proof of her betrayal would ensure a swift divorce and the upper hand in any custody matters that might come up. As I looked through the documents, my phone buzzed. It was Emily, calling for the 10th time that evening. I stared at the screen, watching her name flash with each ring, and after a moment, I answered, keeping my voice cold and steady. "What do you want, Emily?" Her voice was shaky, filled with desperation. "Jack, please, we need to talk. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We have to for the kids, for everything we've built." I let out a bitter laugh. "Now you care about what we've built? Funny, because you didn't seem to care while you were sneaking around with Andrew." "Jack, please, it wasn't like that. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Oh, spare me, Emily. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." I cut her off, the anger bubbling up again. "Do you know what? I've spent years building my life with you, trusting you, and you threw it all away for him. So you'll forgive me if I don't feel like trying to fix things." Silence filled the line, punctuated by her choked sobs. Part of me wanted to feel something, some trace of compassion or pity, but I had nothing left to give her. She'd made her bed, and now she could lie in it alone. Emily's voice trembled on the other end, desperate, pleading. "Jack, please. It was a mistake. I just got lost, okay? I didn't know what I was doing. I was confused. But I love you. I don't want to lose you." I could almost see her, clinging to the hope that a few words could undo the damage, could somehow erase the months of deceit. But her words rang hollow, void of any real remorse. They were the same cliches, the same empty phrases that cheaters probably thought would make everything better. But they didn't. Lost? Confused? I echoed, my voice cutting through her sobs. "No, Emily. You were clear-headed enough to sneak around, to lie to my face, to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. Don't try to make this about some mistake or moment of weakness. This was deliberate." I heard her sniffle, struggling to find the right words. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Jack, but please, let's talk. Just give me a chance to explain." A dark, humorless laugh escaped me. "Explain what, Emily? That you thought you could have your fun with Andrew and then come back to me like nothing happened? Do you have any idea what it's like to find out the person you trusted the most has betrayed you?" "Jack, please. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'll do anything to make it up to you. We can go to therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Please, just give me a chance." Her desperation was thick, her voice cracking under the weight of her pleas. But her words only deepened my resolve. "You had your chance, Emily, and you chose him. You've been choosing him for 6 months. Therapy and apologies won't fix this. I want you to sign the divorce papers and make this easy. For both of us." She sobbed openly now, her broken gasps filling the silence between us. "Jack, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose everything we've built. Please, don't do this." "Everything we built, Emily?" I said, feeling the anger seep through every word. "You tore it all down the minute you decided he was worth risking everything for. There's nothing left to save." I ended the call, silencing her cries, her excuses, and her hollow promises. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. Emily had chosen her path, and I was choosing mine. There was no going back. The days that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, legal calls, and a steady stream of messages from Emily that I mostly ignored. She tried every angle, apologies, accusations, guilt, even pleading through mutual friends. Each attempt was like a desperate tug, pulling at me to engage, to respond, to react. But I'd already made my decision. The foundation of our marriage had crumbled, and there was no salvaging it. One evening, while sorting through the last batch of documents from my lawyer, a text popped up from an unexpected contact, Andrew Stone. My fingers clenched around my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. I opened the message, a short, smug line staring back at me. Asterisk, "You really thought you'd win this? Guess again." Asterisk. The audacity of it sent a fresh wave of anger surging through me. It was as if he couldn't resist one last dig, an attempt to flaunt the damage he'd caused, relishing the chaos he'd unleashed in my life. I realized then that he wasn't just a serial adulterer. He was a man who fed off the power he gained from destroying others' lives. He wasn't satisfied with what he'd done. He wanted to rub it in my face, to make sure I knew he believed he'd won. But that smug message sparked an idea, a final step that I hadn't considered. If he wanted to play games, I'd give him one last move, one he wouldn't see coming. I reached out to Harris, my investigator, who had already proven invaluable in gathering evidence against Emily. This time, I had a different mission for him. I wanted him to dig deeper into Andrew's life, into every lie, every connection, and every weakness he had. I was done being the passive player in this twisted game. It was time to turn the tables. A week later, Harris called, his voice tinged with barely contained excitement. "Jack, you're going to want to sit down for this. I found something." "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. Andrew Stone isn't just a serial cheater. He's been operating under a false identity in some business dealings, skimming money from companies and hiding it in offshore accounts. I've got enough evidence here that, if taken to the authorities, would likely land him in serious legal trouble. A slow smile spread across my face. "You're saying we could expose him?" "More than expose him," Harris replied. "We could destroy him." Andrew had made the fatal mistake of underestimating me. He'd assumed he'd walk away from this affair unscathed, just another name in his long list of conquests. But he'd met his match. I was going to ensure that Andrew paid for every marriage he'd wrecked, every life he'd torn apart. The plan was simple, yet devastating. Harris and I would compile a full dossier of Andrew's activities. Every fraudulent transaction, every shady deal, every lie he'd spun to keep his side hustle going. We were going to deliver this dossier to Andrew's employer, an old-school corporation that prided itself on loyalty and integrity. Once they got wind of what he'd been doing, he wouldn't just lose his job. His entire reputation would crumble. Harris had already arranged a meeting with someone high up in Andrew's company, a no-nonsense executive who wouldn't hesitate to take action. Once we showed them what we had, they'd be compelled to make it a very public firing, which would give Andrew the kind of exposure he'd never anticipated. It was only fitting, after all. He'd taken pleasure in making my pain public, so now he could reap the rewards of his own actions. The day of the meeting arrived. I dressed in a crisp suit and met Harris at a high-rise office downtown, where Andrew's company had its headquarters. My pulse raced as we rode the elevator up, each floor bringing me closer to the man who had ruined my marriage. Only this time, he would be the one caught off guard. We were shown into a glass-walled office with a view of the city skyline. The executive, a stern woman with a razor-sharp gaze, introduced herself as Michelle and offered us seats. Harris wasted no time, pulling out the dossier and laying out the evidence piece by piece. Each document, every photograph, and every statement painted a portrait of Andrew Stone as not only a homewrecker but a con artist and a thief. As she reviewed the contents, Michelle's expression grew colder by the minute. "This is extensive," she murmured, flipping through the final pages. "If even half of this is verified, he won't just be out of a job. He'll be facing legal action." "That's precisely the outcome I'm hoping for," I replied, a grim satisfaction settling in. He's played with people's lives as though they were his personal playground. It's time he sees the consequences. Michelle looked at me, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Mr. Morrison, you can rest assured that we'll handle this. Mr. Stone will be terminated immediately, and we'll be working closely with the authorities to pursue further action." As Harris and I left the building, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Andrew's empire of lies was about to collapse, taking him down with it. He had underestimated me, thought I was just another pawn in his game. But now, he'd learned the cost of underestimating the wrong man. As expected, news of Andrew's downfall spread like wildfire. Within days, he was publicly dismissed from his position, his name linked to fraud and embezzlement across various industry news sites. Rumors swirled about potential charges, and colleagues who once flocked to his charm quickly distanced themselves. The man who had thrived on destroying lives and reputations was now seeing his own reputation tarnished beyond repair. Watching the fallout from a distance felt surreal. I hadn't anticipated just how satisfying it would be to see Andrew brought low, his smug smile replaced by desperation as his world crumbled. Yet this wasn't just about revenge. In a strange way, it was also about reclaiming control, about standing up to a man who had tried to take everything from me without a second thought. Emily's response was as chaotic as I'd expected. As Andrew's disgrace became the talk of our social circles, She reached out to me relentlessly. Texts, calls, voicemails, even showing up at my door on more than one occasion. She seemed rattled, as if she too were grappling with the reality of what Andrew's exposure meant for her life. The allure that had drawn her to him, the charm, the confidence, was all stripped away, revealing a man whose only true talent lay in deception. One evening, I finally answered her call. Her voice was frantic, a mix of regret and desperation. "Jack, please, can we just talk?" I didn't know any of this about Andrew. I was a fool. "I see that now," she pleaded, her tone laced with what sounded like genuine remorse. But I wasn't moved. "Emily, I warned you about men like him. You chose to ignore it. Now you're dealing with the consequences, just like he is." "Please, Jack," she whispered, voice cracking. "I made a mistake, a horrible mistake. Can't we try again?" I took a deep breath, feeling only a cold sense of detachment as I replied. "Try again? Emily, you didn't just make a mistake. You tore our marriage apart, piece by piece, for months. You lied to me, and you betrayed me. There's nothing left to save." Her silence was punctuated by quiet sobs, and maybe, months ago, hearing her cry would have brought a pang of pain, a glimmer of sympathy. But not anymore. This was the end of the road. "For what it's worth," I said, my voice steady, "I hope you learn from this. I hope you realize that actions have consequences. I've moved on, Emily, and I suggest you do the same." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of peace. The chapter with Emily and Andrew was finally closed. I had taken back my life, and nothing they did now could shake that. In the weeks that followed, life started to fall back into place. The divorce proceedings went smoothly, thanks to the pile of evidence I had against Emily. She didn't contest much, aware that her position was too compromised to put up a fight. I kept the house and most of our assets, while she moved into a small apartment across town, far from the life she'd known. Friends reached out, some offering words of sympathy, others stunned by the revelations, but I kept my interactions minimal. I was focused on rebuilding, on creating something stronger out of the ashes of the life I'd once known. One evening, I sat in the quiet of my now empty home, taking it all in. There was a strange sense of serenity, a calm that had eluded me for so long. I realized that, for the first time in months, I wasn't plagued by anger or hurt. I wasn't consumed by the betrayal or the need for revenge. Instead, I felt a sense of freedom, like a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I'd walked through fire, and I had emerged on the other side, scarred but unbroken. I reflected on the journey, the pain, and the lessons learned. Betrayal had tested me, but it had also reshaped me, pushing me to find strength and resilience I hadn't known I possessed. There was no going back to the person I'd been before, and for that, I was grateful. I was moving forward, stronger, wiser, and more focused on the future. As I looked out the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, I knew this was a new beginning. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace. Emily and Andrew had tried to tear me down, but in the end, they'd only shown me what I was capable of. They were nothing more than chapters in a story I was ready to close. With a deep breath, I raised a glass to the future, to new beginnings, and to the strength I'd found in the darkest moments. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely hopeful. The past was behind me, and the road ahead was mine to shape. If you've ever faced betrayal or hardship, remember that strength can be found even in the most difficult times. Have you been through something similar? Share your story below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and growth.